This is the Ground Game Podcast, where we cover politics from the ground up. Here are your hosts, Tom Lobianco and Patrick Bingston.
From sea to shining sea, above the fruited plain and all that stuff, as Washington's on freaking fire, we're back on the Ground Game Podcast. I'm Patrick Fingston. Tom Lobianco's there. Hey, buddy.
Hey, how's it going?
It is an absolute train wreck. Yeah, in politics today, more than normal. Like, not only do we have the impending chaos of the Trump administration, but it's almost like Joe Biden's trying to light the White House on fire circa War of 1812 on his way out.
How much will he charge for cameos?
Can you imagine Joe Biden trying to pronounce names in a cameo?
I bet you it would be less than Trump charged for pardons.
Oh. Well, now they're not even going to have to charge. They're just going to let all the J6ers out. The hostages.
Oh, I know. You know who the real hostage is? Is that guy who went to Belarus. Boy, that was a dumb idea.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know about this.
One of the J6 people, one of the rioters was like, America is really effed up, so I'm going to an Eastern Bloc country that is reconnecting with the Soviet Union because that will be better. And there was a great piece maybe about like months ago. I was checking up on this guy. I was like, well, what happened? Because usually they either fall out of hotel windows in London, or we never hear from them again. They get Navalny'd. And it turns out his lawyer was talking with some reporters, being like, yeah, that was a bad idea. This was really terrible. So don't. Yeah.
Because you're about to get off.
Right, exactly. All you had to do was wait for another bathroom bill to come up. All right. And that would have flipped everything.
Coming up on the show, Eric Garcia, who writes for The Independent from the UK, covers politics in the US for them. Also has some insight on autism and some personal life experience with autism. And it'll be interesting to get his perspective on vaccine autism conspiracy theorist Robert F. Kennedy, who is still, as of now, nominated to run the Department of Health and Human Services. We'll see how long that lasts, but we'll talk to Eric coming up. But you want to get into it?
Let's do it.
First down.
All right. Well, he ain't no senator's son. He's the president's son. Hunter Biden gets the pardon that Joe Biden said he wasn't going to give. You and I have talked a little bit about this on the radio, and we fought a little bit about it, but I can't tell you how terrible of a move this was by the president to let his son off. I mean, certainly it's not like breaking the law or exceeding the Constitution, because the president has clear, unimpeachable, unmitigated pardon authority in the Constitution, right? So he can do whatever he wants. It's just a matter of, is this the right thing to do? And for Democrats to have held themselves out as the good guys, the moral guys, the righteous guys in the face of Trumpism, to now go and do the same damn thing that Donald Trump will be doing anyway, just flies in the face of everything that's right.
Yeah, it gets back to the should Biden have even run again? In this dichotomy with him, which ultimately led to the return of Trump, because, we heard this from voters after the election, this ennui among the Democratic base with Biden, and then conferred to Harris as a result of this, that, they did put themselves up to higher standards. I mean, this is, the same thing as Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski saying that Trump's a dictator, and then after the election going to the dictator's palace to kiss the ring. and coming back and saying, well, it wasn't really a dictator. Campaigns are so crazy, man. Sometimes they end up in insurrections when things get really crazy.
The worst part here, whatever, like he had the gun charge, which was nominal, but it was still breaking the law.
Right.
And he pleaded guilty to tax fraud.
Mm-hmm.
He walked in there and said, I am guilty of committing this crime. And then a jury of his peers found him guilty on the gun charge. I don't think any of that was trumped up, pardon the idiom, but it's also not, when Biden's trying to make the argument that my son's been persecuted here, it's Joe Biden's Justice Department.
Right.
What the hell are we even talking about? And then you just cede the moral high ground to Republicans who, whenever Trump does something completely batshit crazy and pardons all of the January 6th insurrectionists, all Republicans have to point and say, Hunter, we've got our excuse to do whatever the hell we want now.
We talked about this before. I often wonder why Democrats don't do this. Like, why don't you flip it a little bit and be like, well, Trump did an insurrection. We can do an insurrection. Like, why not? Right? Like, I've seen, like, I just rhetorically,
well, Democrats think they're better, right? They think they're better than that. They've always had that holier than thou feeling. And now they really have it with Trump.
This
stuff makes me crazy. This stupid stuff makes me crazy. All right, let's do the next.
It's second down.
Speaking of stupid things, Kash Patel, the bootlicker of bootlickers, with zero prosecutorial experience, zero law enforcement experience, outside of being a public defender in Miami, and nearly blowing up our troops over Nigeria, is Donald Trump's nominee, or likely nominee, to be head of the FBI. Which, by the way, we currently have a director of the FBI who Trump appointed,
right?
And Chris Wray, who is a Republican, by the way, but because he didn't put Joe Biden in prison or something, he's going to get fired. So Donald Trump's not only going. 2 FBI directors have been fired in history. You know who fired them both? Chris Wray will be the second. Donald Trump will have fired them both.
He's racking up the numbers, man. Might even get some impeachments out of it too. With Dems take back the House in 26.
You can argue, he's a lawyer. He worked in national security. You can argue that Kash Patel has been in the space, even though he hasn't really been in the space because he's just been kissing Donald Trump's penny loafers. But there is no justifiable reason that someone like Kash Patel should be leading our federal law enforcement agencies. This is
why he's there, right? It's his background, where he came from. He's Devin Nunes's top staffer. So he came off
from the Intelligence Committee,
off the House
during the Russia collusion investigation.
So, he does have an intelligence background. Now, not one that's necessarily aligned with U.S. intelligence, but he does have that background. He's part. Look, man, they're doing this stuff. I wonder about these enemies list. I wrote about this in the 24/7 yesterday. That are they going to be throwing everybody in jail? And Ivan Raiklin, this pseudo psyops person who works for Michael Flynn, wrote up an enemies list, which is basically just use Chat GPT to read Trump's tweets and plucked every name out of there, and it's like,
are you on it?
What's that?
Are you on it?
No, I'm not actually. I've failed at life apparently, but there's still time, right? I guess we could get there.
It's early.
Yeah, that's right, man. It's
plenty early. The problem here is just that Patel is not a good guy, right? This is a guy who has shown that he doesn't care about his jobs. He doesn't care about the Constitution. He doesn't care about norms. He doesn't care about the federal government. He doesn't care about taxpayers or voters. He cares about one guy. One guy.
And it's not
Donald Trump.
himself, actually. That's what's funny about it. It's
No, he throws himself in front of trains for Donald Trump.
Orange Jesus.
and I've heard stories of how, as Patel has been trying to position himself in MAGA world, this strategy he had of just making sure he was always in the room when Trump was there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That is 100%. If that is how you win inside of Trump world. I've been covering him for 10 years, and the amount of the number of source discussions which come down to this person is in because they're actually around Trump on the plane, or they're out because X number of staffers are keeping him away from Trump on the plane. And then you have to get into, all right, well, who's on the cell phone with him? All right. So it's like, yeah, absolutely. It's always been that way. Yeah.
Does he get confirmed?
Every confirmation vote comes down to at least 3 people. All right. Now, unless they force the recess appointments, I think it's very interesting that they have not been talking as much about recess appointments. If you look, and again, in all things covering politics, but especially so with Trump, you have to watch actions, not words. They were talking weeks ago about shoving this down the throats of the Senate, and then they stopped. So, will there be recess appointments? That seems to be the only way. I don't know, because if you don't get Collins, you don't get Murkowski. Maybe you get McConnell. Maybe. And that's your threshold right there. Maybe JD Vance is a tiebreaker, so you lose one more vote. But no, I don't know. It's yeah.
It's certainly going to be interesting to see where some of these national security minded Republicans go. The Mike Roundses of the world and Mike Crapos who want to see these institutions normalized. Rounds was notable for, I forget where it was. Was it Halifax? Said that he was at some security conference recently.
Yeah.
Basically just pouring cold water on everything that Trump wants to do in foreign policy. And in our intelligence communities, are these the people that we want leading these incredibly important parts of our system? And I certainly think you get no's from Murkowski and Collins, and maybe Mitch McConnell's in the YOLO phase of his waning days, but who else? Is it John Curtis, the freshman, to stand up?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, it's it's some of those guys like Bill Cassidy down in Louisiana.
He's up in 2 years. He's not going to completely test MAGA. Just run a Garrett Graves against him, and he puts on a red hat and he wins by 20 points.
Isn't that something, huh? The return of McCarthy and all of his lieutenants.
Yeah. I mean, or insert red hat, person here, hell, if you put, who's that weird TikTok guy? Is it Two Turnt Tony? Put a red hat on him and go look him up. He's
I don't watch TikTok. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll talk about the Senate in a minute, but I'm certainly having doubts that these guys are going to show some backbone when it really counts. All right, so the Steve Bannon strategy of flood the zone with shit seems to be starting to reappear, in the way that Trump has just piled all of this stuff on us. Biden, of course, completely stumbles all over it because instead of the media talking about Kash Patel for the last 48 hours, as we record this on Tuesday morning, all they've been talking about is Hunter Biden. Could Biden have learned a thing or two from the Steve Bannon and Trump playbook?
I think so. Absolutely. I mean, it's it's like that Simpsons where Montgomery Burns gets his annual physical, goes in and they find there's 1,000 diseases, including 10 of which have seem to have been created just by him, and the the doctor's like, he's like, oh, can you cure this? And the doctor's like, he's like, well, that's the problem. See, if we cured any one of them, it's kind of like all these little fluffy little diseases here in this door jam I got right here. And if you cured one, and all the other ones would come pouring through and kill you instantaneously. Trump has figured out how to put all the diseases in the door jam. And and I don't, Biden, anybody could. Anybody absolutely could. Look, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene knows how to do this. All you have to do is just get out there, start talking about, crazy microchips. I mean, hell, Elon Musk is actually talking about putting microchips in people's heads. All right. So you don't even have to make that one up. Okay. And just start flooding the zone with stuff that doesn't make any sense. It's super easy.
The thing with Joe Biden, and maybe he could have taken some notes here, but Biden is the politician of yesteryear.
Oh yeah,
right. I mean, he's the guy that when he's trying to give his charming speech, you can always tell the people who are from the older generation because they always use and ladies and gentlemen, what we're gonna do is this. They always fit in that ladies and gentlemen thing, and you can tell who the old guys are by that. And Biden is one of the old guys. He's one of the backslappers. He's one of he's a different breed than today's Washington.
That's right.
And I always wondered in 2020, as he was running in this, even I mean, 2024 is completely different in those standards, but in 2020 standards, how the old school was going to relate to our new world of politics. And he clearly just wasn't up for the job.
Yeah.
In terms of policy, in terms of being who he has always been, right? He was never a liberal, progressive, over the top Bernie Sanders type, and maybe John Meacham convinced him that he was FDR for some reason because he can bring us back from COVID and start a new deal. And that led to some of the complete overreach that he could never sell. But I think it's going to be important that for Democrats, if they're going to, I don't think it's the way that you fight Trumpism, because you can't just throw all the stuff about Trump against the wall, right? Because there's too much of it.
Right.
Right. It'll be the monkey cage at the National Zoo. It'll be too much poo on the wall. But when you get to a new administration or a new campaign or a general election campaign in 2028, whether it's Josh Shapiro or Gretchen Whitmer or JB Pritzker, I doubt it'll be Gavin Newsom, because most of America will look at someone like Gavin Newsom and say, really? but they're going to have to flood the zone with all of the things that Democrats can do and all of the ways that Republicans are completely batshit crazy and unqualified. And it's going to take a new strategy, because what the Harris campaign did, they followed this old Obama playbook of try and discredit your opponent. But Trump is completely undiscreditable. I don't know.
He's completely discredited, and they proved that discrediting doesn't work.
It didn't,
because
no
it's
one
not
cared.
2008.
No one cared.
Yeah, that's 16 years ago.
So it's going to be interesting to see how Democrats change their messaging strategy moving forward, because clearly just attack, and then talk about abortion all the time.
Yeah.
Didn't work.
Right.
So they need a strategy that looks, I can't believe I'm saying this, looks more like Trump's.
Right.
Of just flood the zone with all the stuff, distract from the bad news, and say everything you can possibly say so that something sticks. And they haven't done that.
Yeah.
They're using the old school, here's our message of the week.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what the Democrats would put on that. I mean, there's been a couple consistent themes for Republicans, right? It's, at least in the last 10 years, in this Trumpified version of the Republican Party, which is immigration, all right, hard line on immigration, a trade, sort of this pseudo economic populism, and everybody else is a pedophile, all right, or a transgender, a pedophile, all right, and that's been a consistent theme. Even the people who, like Matt Gaetz, who has sex with apparently with a 17-year-old girl, is being sex trafficked multiple times, all right,
allegedly,
right? I mean, remember they were selling those shirts called groomers, all right, like. But it's that repetition of the other side of a single line. Everything else becomes a pedophile. All right. And frankly, it feels to me like the Democrats, this high-minded stuff, they brought a knife to a bazooka fight, and they just did not appreciate it at all. And maybe they will. I mean, maybe people will stop listening to Pod Save America and the Obama Brain Trust and start finding some new blood in the party, because that did not work.
All right, last topic. I've made it very clear that I believe Senate Republicans are jellyfish who have zero inclination, zero likelihood. It's more likely that Mitch McConnell dances the cha-cha on the Senate floor than it is that he votes against any of these nominees. Beyond top to bottom, and fine. Rubio's maybe the most normal of them, or Doug Burgum.
Mike Waltz.
Mike Waltz is relatively normal. He's pretty red hat though. But you've got a list of Cracker Jacks in these nominees, from Hegseth to RFK Jr. to Tulsi Gabbard, certainly Kash Patel. Is there any chance the Senate actually stands up and says no to any of these?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. It's, look at when the flood of the flood of effrontery started. It started after the Senate Republicans chose one of their own, John Thune. And, Elon Musk says, well, you must pick Rick Scott. And everybody in that conference is like, yeah, we tried him 2 years ago. He didn't deliver. So we're going with somebody who will.
But that was a secret ballot. They didn't have to put their name on anything.
It was a secret ballot. But look, that's how Glenn Youngkin became governor. I mean, delegates down in Virginia, again, you play on the field where you are. All right. And that's how it works. I mean, it's part of the reason that the founders set this up as such. It's why senators have 6-year terms and House members have 2-year terms. So, I mean, that's the way it is. I think structurally there are some incentives. Now, do they kick out Pete Hegseth for these multiple accusations of sexual assault? Apparently, that's the police report that we've seen. Potentially, you think so? Yeah.
If your own mom says you abuse women, it's probably bad for your character.
I always think about this. Remember that Chappelle Show skit with R. Kelly back in the day? It's, oh yeah, man, this is great.
I'm a white kid from a farm. I didn't
know
who Dave Chappelle was,
man.
until
Everybody
I was
should know Chappelle.
25. But.
Dude, Dave Chappelle is now a black kid from a farm. He's living out in Dayton, Ohio. All right.
I am aware of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Dayton, not a farm, but I hear you.
Well, I don't know, man. I read Hillbilly Elegy, and that's the way it was presented to me. Hey, man, I'm just from the I-95 corridor. I don't know shit.
Here's the thing. Like, I fully expect Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski to be on an island here, right? Where they may vote for the Stefanics and the Rubios and anyone who's not terribly offensive. And I think I still think Gabbard and Hegseth are probably in the worst shape because they're the ones most likely to peel off your intelligence or defense minded Republicans. We mentioned Crapo and Rounds on the defense and intelligence side. I think Todd Young, our guy from Indiana, who could absolutely be someone that could blow up his future in the party and start being a Trump antagonist. Maybe Mitch McConnell goes YOLO on us and does some of this, but I think those are a lot of maybes. A lot of maybes for a group of people, 53 people who are scared to death of crossing the red hat line.
They got to pick their battles. That's what's going to happen. Gabbard, I would put at the top of the in danger list.
Tulsi Gabbard, who may or may not be, but definitely totally is a Russian asset. And Bashar al-Assad sympathizer. And Syria's in the news now too. So I mean, it's not like that's something that's going away.
Boy, that was great. You see that the rebels retaking? My God, are we working with Lebanon on that? Do you see that? Or what was the? I've been reading.
Well, I know our conversations with Lebanon at this point have mostly been involving removing Israeli troops from Lebanon and moving Lebanese troops back. So I don't know exactly. Maybe there was a deal to involve Syria there, but I don't know that the Biden administration has really wanted to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Right.
So I'm not really sure.
Rebels.
I mean, I don't know if that's happening with any influence from the U.S.
Okay.
I don't have any hands up. I don't have any expertise on that. I think considering the situation we're in.
I mean, I don't even know where Dayton, Ohio is. I couldn't tell you about Syria.
Our boy from Baltimore. All right, let's get to Eric Garcia.
It's time to go in the huddle.
All right, we are pleased to welcome Eric Garcia. He writes for The Independent from the UK. Also has a couple of great books out there on autism and has been an expert on these things because he lives it every day. And certainly with the RFK Jr. nomination for HHS, it's somebody that we wanted to touch base with because Eric, this feels like just such a weird world that we're living in. But let's start. If you just want to tell us your story about how you got to where you are, how autism plays a role in it, and what it means for your life and career.
Yeah, obviously the way I got into autism was I was born, as my friend John Marble likes to say. But I think the other thing that was really interesting is that initially I didn't want to. When I got into journalism, I really didn't want to write about autism. I really didn't want to, that was just something. I wasn't ashamed of it, but it was just another thing. I wrote my first jobs writing about economics and financial markets, and then I wrote a lot. And then the 2015 election rolls around, and what happened was Donald Trump runs for president. And if you remember, in the first debate, he talked about how autism has become an epidemic, and he blamed vaccines. And we could talk a little bit about Trump's history with anti-vaxxers in a bit, but then my feeling was wait, this is what I thought about it was look, Trump is Trump, and yeah, he's a Republican, but I grew up in Southern California, some background, and I know a lot of Democrats who think the same stuff about him with autism and vaccines, because I don't know if you remember back in 2015 there was that measles outbreak and at Disney World, and then and it's because a lot of parents just in liberal, crunchy moms weren't vaccinating their kids. And so that was really kind of the beginning of it for me. And then so I wrote this piece for National Journal called I'm Not Broken, and that turned into the book We're Not Broken. And I've been really and it's funny because I kind of treat writing about autism as my night job. And then to see it kind of intersect with my day job is really surprising. But like, I think one of the things that I really want to stress is that this has all kind of been bubbling and gurgling beneath the surface. And we've kind of reached a point where like anti-vaxxers were waiting for a moment like this. And I think that it's important to say that like RFK Jr. could not exist without the kind of moral panic that existed around autism and vaccines in the 90s and the 2000s.
God, great point, man. Yeah, like it's so weird to see these like the health food people on board with this. I mentioned I do the 24 site live stream with listeners and take questions, and we were talking about some of this yesterday. And I used to work in health food stores years ago, pre Whole Foods, so before it was everywhere. And I'm like watching hardcore conservatives talk about the supplements that I used to sell at a hippie food store. This is hippies.
Yeah. It's so funny. Like, I forget who said this, but like the far left and the far right meet at the intersection of a health food store.
Yes.
And like, I think it's really, and I think it's so fascinating because it kind of jives with both their ideologies. So like, if you're a far right conservative, there's kind of this idea of like, oh, the government's not going to tell me what to do. The government's, the Alex Jones chemicals in the water that turn the frogs gay. That kind of thing, which like it's this conspiratorial, and there's a lot of intersection with there's a lot of intersection with transphobia there. So like it doesn't surprise me at all. But like there is this kind of like government is. Because it's funny, I was talking with Senator Rand Paul about it. It's like we've seen regulatory capture, which like I never thought I would hear like a libertarian like Rand Paul talk about stuff like that. But like there's this idea of like the government is doing all this stuff and forcing us to do this, and it's preventing us from like taking care of ourselves. Like that's the whole rationale behind like the raw milk thing. Like the government is forcing milk to be pasteurized with like the real healthy stuff, and it's taking away this real healthy option for you. And then for the far left and for a lot of conspiracy crunchy folks on the left and the weird hippie types, it's like, it's funny because it's like, if you believe it's anti-vaccine stuff, because like RFK, from what I understand, he got into this, and my friend Michael Hobbs has talked about this, like he got into the anti-vaccine stuff because of food allergies. And he thought it was like, that like people started to get food allergies because of vaccines. That was like how he started to get into it. And then that's how he got into the vaccine thing. And that's when he wrote that article for Salon and Rolling Stone magazine called, I think it was called Deadly Immunity. And that was like kind of the beginning because he was an environmental lawyer, And
interesting.
And like what I said is that it's like, if you believe that the government is forcing that like pharmaceutical companies are poisoning your kids and making them autistic, it's so much easier to believe any other conspiracy theory because it's the most basic thing that like to protect your children and like and to protect like your kids. And so if you believe that the government is in league with pharmaceutical companies, it's so easy to believe anything else. And what's funny about it is that like I talk about this all the time with autistic people, and it's like, they accuse us of being in league with big pharma, like when like we say that vaccines are good. But it's like, do you know who hates pharmaceutical companies more than anybody else? People with disabilities. Why? Because like pharmaceutical companies jack up the prices of their drugs. They're always the one that they're always on the phone with their health insurance companies and Medicaid, like this is covered, this isn't covered.
Right.
Like people with disabilities are very familiar with the.
I'm surprised that Martin Shkreli isn't next up for CMS after Dr. Oz gets canned.
Right. Yeah. So like, because it's so like people with disabilities. So like, how are the funny that like people with disabilities are accused of being pharmaceutical shills because they're the ones who often have to fight with the drug companies more than any of these parents ever will have to fight with with them. So when they're the ones who are saying, no, vaccines don't cause autism, it is so hilarious, the idea that they're stooges, and a lot also take into account that a lot of people with disabilities and autistic people live in poverty, and like you think they would be richer if they were on the take, you know.
It wasn't that long ago, and maybe this is a COVID discussion, but it wasn't that long ago that normal people, rank and file people, rolled their eyes at the vaccine skeptics, the people who said, well, I don't want to give my kid an MMR vaccine before they go to school. We used to think not that long ago, 5 years ago, that those were the crazy people. And now this is the stuff that's almost mainstream. What changed?
So this is a really complicated history. There have been anti-vaxxers as long as there have been vaccines. There's I forget, there was like a story in like the 19th century about like one preacher in Massachusetts who didn't want to immunize people or something like that. I forget. Go back. There's like a whole history around this. But really, what happens is there's this real kind of beginning of skepticism around vaccines around the 1980s and really into the 1990s. There were some investigative news pieces about this and segments around it. But really, what happens is in 1998, there's this guy by the name of Andrew Wakefield, who is who's a pediatrician, who's a physician, and in the United Kingdom, and he puts out a study in the Lancet saying that putting a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. And what's interesting is, and again, to the point that it's never been a left-right thing, he was invited to testify before Congress. And it's really important to understand the timing of when that study came out, because it was just around the time when autism had gotten a separate diagnosis from schizophrenia in 1980. The diagnostic criteria had expanded from between 1980 and 1994. That's when you get things like pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, Asperger's syndrome, infantile autism, all these different versions of autism. And then what you see is that because the diagnostic criteria had expanded, and because the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act required schools to report to the federal government how many autistic students it was serving, because autism was covered under that, then what you saw is an increase in diagnoses. And on top of that, and this is the most important thing, in the years before, there had been a big push from psychiatrists and researchers saying that unloving mothers caused autism. And so you have to think about that. For decades, going from the 1940s into the 1970s, 1980s even, parents were blamed for their children being autistic. There are stories of parents being told to send their kids away to institutions and to put away pictures of their kids because they to just pretend they didn't exist. So think about that mindset and think about, because it was interesting, when I wrote my first book, I went back and I watched a lot of the old congressional hearings, and they're saying, we're so glad that we've moved on from this idea that vaccines don't cause, that unloving parents cause autism. That's in the trash. And they're but you think that was not too long ago. And so what happens is you get, and that was really the push of a lot of parents. There's this guy by the name of Bernard Rimland who really pushed back against the scientific consensus. And what's interesting is he was one of the people who really started to believe that diet could be something that could help autistic children and mitigate their symptoms. And during that same hearing, I believe, or one of the hearings afterward, he's testifying at the House Oversight Committee with Andrew Wakefield, about vaccines and autism and things like that. So it gives parents a culprit. And for so long they were held responsible for their kids being autistic. So I really and on top of that, I think it really fits into, again, this kind of David versus Goliath thing. Because think about the way that it was set up. It's these parents, these concerned parents versus the pharmaceutical companies. It fits so well in a media framework, in a media setting. So that happens. Then of course, what do we learn? Well, we learned that Andrew Wakefield was a liar, that he was being paid by law firms that were trying to sue the vaccine companies in the United Kingdom. He loses his medical license, and he loses his and the Lancet study is retracted. But think about it. That was in 1998. That study comes out. The study doesn't get retracted until 2010. All that stuff doesn't happen. So that goes on, and that enters the bloodstream for like more than a decade. And it just, and that kind of just sinks in. And what's funny, one of the saddest things when I wrote my book, I interviewed this one person, this one guy who his parents blamed themselves for him becoming autistic because of the vaccines, and they blame themselves like and just think about like what it did is that, like, and the point that I make is like, think about how much different the world could be and what better things could exist for autistic people if we hadn't spent all this time talking about vaccines. So anyway, that's a long way about going around.
Wow, it's incredible. Like, it's so like I look at this as just as a reporter, and I have to remind myself that most people are not reporters, and most people are not trained, and this is not trained to be professionally skeptical of things. I mean, that is one of our professional superpowers.
Yeah,
and it is amazing to me when I hear people talk about a member of the Kennedy clan who was exceedingly wealthy and married to Hollywood royalty as the David in this story, much the same way that I hear about Trump, who is a Manhattan real estate developer who is, spectacularly wealthy. And I'm like, wait a minute, guys, like that's flipped. Like,
that's the irony. And I could do you one better. So Trump comes to autism in a really interesting way. The person who really puts autism on Trump's radar is a guy by the name of Bob Wright, who's the head of NBC Universal, and who was, and his grandson, Christian, was diagnosed with autism. And Bob Wright, of course, was head of NBC Universal. What happens? Well, in the years afterward, Bob Wright, I believe in 2005, 2006, starts Autism Speaks. And there was an article in Business Insider a few years ago that talked about how the Wright family went down to Mar-a-Lago. And, like, of course, Bob Wright is the guy who put Donald Trump on all of our television screens when he put Donald Trump on The Apprentice. Bob Wright owned for a while, I don't know if he still does, owned a penthouse in Trump Tower. And so what's interesting about it, though, is, and this is where it gets murky and we don't really know, is that, so Bob has always, if you read his book, The Right Stuff, which is his memoir about starting NBC, working at NBC Universal and starting Autism Speaks, he kind of tries to have it both ways and do a little two-step and tap dance on vaccines and autism. But his daughter, Katie Wright, who's the mother of his grandson Christian, is basically I guess it's fair to say, is an anti-vaxxer. And so this is Trump's real introduction to autism, is this family, the Wright family, which is a wealthy philanthropic family. And it's funny that you look at this because autism in like the two, so like we go from like, this is a version of schizophrenia, it's a form of childhood psychosis, to the 90s and the 2000s when it really becomes a philanthropic effort of the wealthy and the elite to fix it. And really, I think that's the lens through which you have to view how Trump and the Kennedys and the Wright family see autism. They see it as a philanthropic cause.
Interesting.
Through that which rich people have to fix.
Wow.
Yeah, enter RFK, right? That this guy who has no real, at least no documented history of people around him with autism, at least none that come to mind specifically, who comes from a wealthy family, who spends the majority of his early career, one is a posh rich kid doing a lot of cocaine, and two is an environmental lawyer.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he becomes this huge voice of the anti-vax movement, and still does a lot of cocaine. Well, maybe not anymore, but did a lot of cocaine for a long time.
Was it heroin?
He did do heroin too.
Yeah,
cocaine and heroin
during college.
Lots of RFK parties out there. Okay, but where the hell did this come from?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's really important to recognize that, like, because he was an environmental lawyer, and like I said, he got into this through food allergy stuff. Like, I think it was like one of his kids had food allergies or something like that. And that was really his introduction to the idea that, oh, well, vaccines might cause food allergies or something like that. My friend Michael Hodgkin is talking about this. And that really begins his climb into the or his dive into the anti-vaccine rabbit hole, because he put out this article in Rolling Stone and in Salon.com that's called Deadly Immunity, that later gets retracted, about the link between vaccines and autism. And his whole argument, and this is a very clever thing that a lot of anti-vaxxers do. They say, no, we're not against vaccines. What we want an investigation into the mercury that's in vaccines. Well, even then, many years ago, they got rid of thimerosal, which is the type of mercury that's in vaccines, just as a precautionary measure without any kind of evidence to back that up, just because there was a concern about that. So again, they do that. And so it's interesting. The anti-vax movement does a really good job of saying that we want to green our vaccines. We don't want to put all these weird substances in it. And in many ways, it mirrors his language around food. Mm. Is that there's like all these toxic substances, it's like, without recognizing that, like, look, these things have been tested, these things have been researched, have been reviewed consistently. And so what was interesting to me was that his running mate, Nicole Shanahan, her daughter Echo. So Nicole Shanahan, I believe she used to be married to one of the former executives at Google. I think it was Sergey or Larry, one of the two. It was Sergey Brin, yeah. Yes. She gets into RFK really when her daughter is diagnosed with autism. And what was interesting is that, like, RFK Jr., he points out, like, he posted a video of, like, one of his campaign directors who has a son on the autism spectrum. This is the thing that's really interesting to me, is that, like, you have parents. Like, I don't envy any parent of an autistic kid, because when they get the diagnosis, not because autism is a bad thing or suggested, but because there's so little resources, there's so few resources, that you're just kind of like, you get this new diagnosis, especially if your kid requires around the clock care. Oftentimes, like, if you have to put your kid gets diagnosed, you have to put them on a wait list so that they can get Medicaid home care when they're adults. Like, there's talk, like, currently the wait list for Medicaid waivers, it goes upwards of 700,000 people across the country, and of course it varies state by state. So, like, and then of course you're talking about IEPs, you're talking about getting, so, like, when you are a parent and you don't have a lot of these resources, kind of like help, and the absence of real substantive support for autistic people, I think that someone like RFK offers a very simple solution, which is, no, it's the vaccine companies that made your kids this way. It wasn't your fault. You're not a bad parent. You're not a failure as a parent. These people did something to you. And I think that's a very powerful message for parents when they're overwhelmed.
It's scapegoating.
It is. Absolutely. It's scapegoating. Yeah.
It's brilliant. I mean, it's what Trump does with immigrants.
It is. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's McCarthyism. It's remarkable.
It is incredibly remarkable. And it's like, and I think that one of the things that worries me is that it's bad. I'm friends with like one of my really good friends. She's a former anti-vax mom, and now she's a son who works around the clock. Her name is Shannon Desroches Rosa. She writes a great blog called The Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. I recommend everybody read it. And, like, the thing of it is that you realize how much time you expect when, like, a lot of parents, wake up and realize that they realize how much time they expended trying to get off of this. Oh, and I should note, my friend Jacqueline Sweet flagged this. The anti-vaccine supplement that Kash Patel sells was started by two parents of an autistic son. So, like, there's a whole level of right-wing crankery that comes.
Wow.
That's a wellspring from this. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that, like, if you think about how much time is expended, how much better could things be if that time and energy was expended on getting better services for kids, increasing research into services. The amount of money that we spend that the NIH and nonprofits spend on biology just is infinitely bigger than the amount of money we spend on lifespan services and lifespan issues for autistic people, because they're eventually going to grow up. Like, one of the big fears that any parent of a developmentally disabled child with an intellectual disability has is, like, are they going to be able to outlive their kid? And if they don't, like, are there going to be services available for them? Like, and sometimes it works, but, like, one of the toughest things, one of the toughest conversations that, look, I talk with parents all over the country. When I talk about my book, when I go get book talks, it's like the big fear they have is, like, look, when my kid turns 18 or when my kid falls off the service cliff at 21, what's next? And there's so many times I wish I could give them a good answer, but I can't give them a good answer. But if we spent just a little bit more money on researching lifespan issues, if we spent just a little more money looking into services and what are the best services in aging, things could be so much better, and I could probably give a better answer.
So what does it mean in terms of practical application if RFK were to be confirmed as HHS secretary? I mean, he and Trump have already talked about cutting funding for research, which I'm sure would touch autism research as well. Obviously, there are vaccine mandates out there, and that are part of every kid who goes to school. Most of that's on the state level, but certainly there would be a push on the federal level. In practicality, especially from that intellectual disability community perspective, what would an RFK term as HHS secretary mean?
It would take a sledgehammer to so many things that people hold dear. So, for example, the NIH is one of the biggest funders of research and grants for autism. And again, the point that I make is that we're starting to see better, the pie kind of divide a little bit better on looking into research into lifespan issues and services. Not the way I would like to see it, but, like, a majority of it still goes to biology. That would likely go out the window. We would likely see probably more research into, debunked research into vaccines. Let's take into account that HHS is also in charge of Medicaid. It's also in charge of Medicare. CMS. Dr. Oz is Trump's nominee for CMS. This would have huge, wide-ranging effects. On top of that, there's the fact that Trump famously, like, he talked about, I'm not going to touch Social Security and Medicare, but he didn't talk about Medicaid. Medicaid is a big thing. It is, so many parents and so many autistic people rely on Medicaid, not just for healthcare, but for home services and for education as well. This would have wide-ranging implications also on the type of research that's done, on the type of drugs that are covered, on the type of drugs that are researched, on the type of therapies, on the type of RFK could very easily invest more money into the type of crank treatments that autistic people face, and, like, make those kind of the priority for autistic people instead of lifespan issues or services issues. So it has huge implications aside from the infectious disease angle, which is, of course, the big thing that dismissing vaccine research as well.
Dude, what's the name of the blog again? The resource?
The Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. Shannon Rosa.
Okay.
She's. I was actually over with them in San Francisco like 2 weeks ago. So
what?
Yeah.
Well, Eric, before we let you go, I'll ask you this, and this may be personal, and if it is too much, we can always cut it out. But I I think there are a lot of people who don't know how to, maybe just don't understand the autism community. You know, because it's so varied from I mean, you work on the Hill. I have one of my wife's best friends. Her kid just got his driver's license at 16 and pitches on the baseball team to the kids that are nonverbal, right? So it's such a wide. I don't want to use spectrum because it literally is a spectrum, but how do those of us who don't really understand the situation, how do we learn how to address it, and even specifically from a public policy perspective?
I think the best thing to do is listen. You know, right now, I think one of the good things is that, like, you know, what was interesting is a few months ago, I was interviewing this guy by the name of Ben Bro. He lives in the suburbs of Virginia. He's a non-speaking autistic person who's a poet and an artist who uses a tablet to communicate. And we did a whole interview for like an hour. You know, there's also people like Hari Srinivasan, who's a grad student at Vanderbilt University, who is not speaking. And I think the other thing is like recognizing it's a spectrum, but finding ways to listen to what the real needs of autistic people are, and listening to them, and taking stock, and realizing and shedding biases, and realizing that I think autism is with us to stay, and it's been with us forever. You know, what's funny is there's this old friend of mine sent me this old writing from Martin Luther during the Protestant Reformation, where he's writing about a child who
Lutherans represent. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, who's like demon possessed, but it turns out likely the kid was autistic, you know? And so like it's been around with us forever. And I think the thing that I would say is like instead of fearing it, we should ask what to do to help. Because when you stop fearing something and you start asking questions, then you could accept and welcome in and embrace other people. So that's what I would say.
Amen.
Eric Garcia writes for The Independent from the UK. Also, his great book, We're Not Broken. Go find it on Amazon or your favorite bookstore or wherever you can find it. Eric, I really appreciate your conversation and perspective, and thanks for all the work that you do.
Thank you so much, man.
It's time for the second half.
Thanks to Eric Garcia. Dude's awesome.
I love Eric. Dude, he's like, and what a perfect time to hear from him now.
Right.
I mean, this is like so crucial. The way he connects the dots is just amazing.
Well, and I think it's also important. Don't let the cranks scare us, right? Yeah. That there's, and I am admittedly not one who is perfectly understanding of the developmental disability or developmental delayed community.
I'm still learning myself.
And to have someone with that perspective is really great, especially someone on the Hill.
Oh yeah,
who can talk about these issues better than certainly anyone. So, all right, we got a couple of questions out there. Will it be harder to get things through the House, especially after the resignations of Stefanik and Waltz?
Yes.
Okay, good talk.
Yes.
No, I mean, seriously, you got is it, 6-seat majority likely?
Oh yeah, right. I mean, what's the number, like 217, 215? I mean, that's,
it could be that close, right? Yeah. With because you're going to start with an opening in the Matt Gaetz seat, because he's not going to take his seat. I assume like Stefanik and Waltz take their seats in early January and then resign.
Yeah, that sounds right.
After, because you don't give up your job before you're confirmed for the new one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you still have to go through the hearings. Yeah.
So you know, you have a resignation in probably late January. So you've got 2 months, maybe 3 months while that seat is open before a special election. They're generally safe seats. I mean, like Gaetz is the Redneck Riviera, and Stefanik's kind of northern New York, upstate New York
border.
I don't know Waltz's district very well, but I'm certain that you know, Florida has been drawn pretty well for Republicans. So, you know, they probably stay Republican, but if you're trying to push through things in those first couple of months, you're gonna have a majority
very tight, man. It's especially taxes. So the sunset on the tax bill. the renegotiating of that. That's a big package you got to deal with. So yeah, that's gonna be tough.
And in the real world, Mike Johnson would negotiate with Hakeem Jeffries and try and put a structured vote together and a bipartisan deal together. But if he does that, all hell breaks loose with the Freedom Caucus clowns.
They dial up the Jewish space laser and they nuke them.
Marjorie Taylor Greene runs
too easy. It's too easy.
In honor of Thanksgiving, who's the biggest turkey in DC this year?
Oh, come on, man. Now you that is premeditated. I know you did that on purpose.
I picked the best ones, my friend. I picked the
Oh
best.
man. How long you got to go? It's like 15 minutes for every pound, half hour for every pound you got to roast it.
No, it's not a half hour.
20
if
minutes?
it's a half hour, it's your grandma's sandpaper turkey. It's about 13 minutes.
Okay. All right. Yeah. How long does the Jewish space laser take? 5 minutes? Pound?
I mean, Steve Bannon certainly feels like a good choice for this because he's been in prison, out of prison, is back in his basement doing his podcast. He has the complexion of a raw turkey. So Steve Bannon feels like a pretty good choice here. Ted Cruz feels like a pretty decent choice. One of those total sellouts. He looks more like a deep fried turkey.
Oh yeah, man.
But there's some real turkeys.
There's a lot of damage that came out of that election. A lot of collateral damage. I never knew that Cruz hid in a closet during January 6th.
What a great story. Or no, Cruz. No, because that was Colin Allred. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Holly was the one that ran away like a little girl.
He was high stepping it.
Yeah, Colin Allred pointed that out during the
he's running
during the debate. You got a turkey? Who's your turkey?
Oh man. How many
other than Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Oh, no.
Because the Freedom Caucus are always the turkeys. Cash Patel.
Man, I just, like every day I get up, I start cooking breakfast. I'm like, this would be so much easier if that damn Jewish space laser would kick in. I just really.
All right, submit your questions. We're still on Twitter, even though Tom nuked his Twitter account.
Blue Sky, yo.
ground_game_pod. I'm still Blue Sky skeptical, and the liberals hate me for it. I got so much hate last week because I said that it's a liberal echo chamber. It is a liberal echo chamber right now, and I am not.
Which, by the way, is bullcrap. I will say, like when people start dragging like anybody who shows up, I'm like, yo, like Patrick is not QAnon. He's Q curious. Like when he. I've
been fighting these people for months, for years. I've been on the front freaking lines. Don't call me that.
Just a little bit of the blood of children in the pasta sauce. Not like a full ounce.
Don't tell them my secrets. That's why my pasta sauce is so good. That's why I look so young.
Yeah, very clearly.
All right, send us your questions. Find us on Twitter, on Blue Sky, on your favorite podcast app, on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, etc. And subscribe, like, add a comment on our YouTube page.
Right. Yeah.
Get us involved. Share us with your friends so that we can help to build this little podcast that could and help us grow, because we're trying to do something a little bit different where we're not strictly partisan. I have a policy set of positions. Tom's just a straight reporter. But I'm generally of the mind that both parties kind of suck these days. So I'm willing to take everybody to task, and I hope that there's a lane for us, and we're gonna keep trying to find it.
We're bringing light in the darkness, yo.
The Washington Post isn't doing that anymore. So
that's right. They opened up the audience for us. Thanks, guys.
All right, Tom. Thanks so much, buddy.
Peace out, baby.
And we'll see you next time here on the Ground Game Podcast.